Hey everybody, let's take 5 minutes out of our day and meditate on God's Word together. Jesus tells 3 parables that form a trilogy of parables about someone who lost something very important, but then they found it. We've seen the lost sheep. Today we'll talk about the lost coin in Luke 15, verse 8. Jesus says, "What woman, having 10 silver coins, if she loses 1 coin, does not light a lamp and sweep the house and seek diligently until she finds it? And when she has found it, she calls together her friends and neighbors, saying, 'Rejoice with me, for I have found the coin that I had lost.' Just so I tell you, there is joy before the angels of God over one sinner who repents." Word of the Lord. Now, this is an interesting parable because the central character in it is a woman. Now, there's a lot of talk about, a lot of scholarly discussion about women in the ancient world, and some of it may be overstated. Women in the ancient world were not necessarily all poor or all despised, even though they were in many ways second-class citizens. When you look closely at the Bible, Old Testament and New Testament stories, what we find is that women in the ancient world were not always as dependent and second-class as we may think. For example, this woman, she has 10 silver coins. She has her own house. She has her own friends that she invites over. She doesn't ask her husband for permission that we know of. They didn't have to ask their husbands for permission. This woman seems to be someone who is fairly well off, owns her own house, matter of fact. In the ministry of Jesus, there were many prominent women: Mary Magdalene, Joanna, a woman named Joanna, a woman named Susanna, who funded his ministry. They supported his ministry, from what Luke tells us in Luke chapter 8. And there are many other influential women in the Bible. Ruth is a very influential one. Esther, a very powerful woman. In the later Jewish apocryphal literature, there are other stories of powerful women: Judith and Susanna. In the Maccabees, there are stories of powerful matriarchs of families. So we shouldn't think that when there's a woman here, she's this poor woman who only has 10 silver coins. That means she's quite wealthy, as a matter of fact. And so she has, also as we noticed, she has her own friends and neighbors. The gender of these nouns indicate these are female friends and female neighbors. She has her own social group. So don't be taken aback by a ancient Jewish woman who has money. That really wasn't uncommon. Perhaps what should take us aback in this parable is that here's a woman who lost something, or a person who lost something, and she took ownership. She took responsibility for this. In the last parable, we saw how the shepherd lost the sheep, or the sheep was lost from what the shepherd says, and he finds it. And so he rejoices because the sheep that was lost is now found. However, here, notice what she says: "Rejoice with me, for I have found the coin that I had lost." She took responsibility for it, and she found it, and she rejoiced. I think that's significant because, note, this is a trilogy. Jesus is building up this story here. He's building up the story, and there's a progression to the intensity of each of these parables. And the sheep, it was lost, but now the coin is lost, and she recognizes that she had found it. It's easy to celebrate when you found something you lost. It's harder to admit that you're the one who lost it, that it's your fault it's lost to begin with. But this woman does that. I would argue that once you admit your responsibility for it and then you find it, the rejoicing could be even greater. So this parable, even though it's really similar to the parable of the lost sheep, this is the key difference, perhaps. Do we take responsibility for what we have lost? This is what this teaches us. Do we take responsibility for ourselves being lost? Or do we blame others? Is it someone else's fault? Is it our parents' fault, or our spouse's fault, or someone else's fault? Maybe not that I'm lost, but that I just have this attitude, or I have these character traits or these habits, and it's someone else's fault. Do we take responsibility for our part in losing others? Do we take responsibility for our words to someone or about someone? Do we take responsibility for the lack thereof of words, lack of words that can lead to someone falling away or being injured in some way? That's the challenge of the lost coin. And this woman that challenges us greatly. So Jesus will conclude this trilogy with someone who lost something extremely valuable and is searching desperately to find it, his own son. We'll talk about that next time we take 5. I'll see you then.